Most entrepreneurs I speak to do not use that term. They do not even know that they are entrepreneurs or even being entrepreneurial.
A presence that is vulnerable and open to input from others is more important than a staunch, utterly bold, indestructible kind of assertiveness. Charisma's bollocks. But also it's often the term we use when we look at a person and say, you're really successful and you're kind of strange and odd and I don't understand how you're doing it, so I'm going to call you charismatic.
Welcome to the Wild.
So welcome to this exciting episode of Entrepreneurs in the Wild. Today, I have the honour of being joined by John Amaechi. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I'm so excited that you accepted our invitation. For our viewers and listeners, we do have a couple of things in common. Number one, same birthday.
Unbelievable.
You didn't know that.
Unbelievable.
I only knew that. That's Wikipedia for you.
Yep.
So same birthday, but you're obviously a year lighter than me. And
obviously.
And then same school.
Yeah.
So I remember you from Stockport Grammar School. You were the most incredible person then, and you know you've gone on to do amazing things in the world.
It feels like a long time ago.
Factually, it is.
That's true.
Actually a long time ago. So thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. What we're trying to do is shine a light on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial behaviour, and also look at it from lots of different angles. So it'd be great just to hear something about you, your journey, and where you're at now.
Got you. All right, I can do that. When people ask, I always tell people first that I'm a nerd and a geek. Other things are more obvious about me. I am 6'9" and I don't know, 26 stone or something. And that's obvious. But being a nerd and a geek is probably the most important thing to know about me if you're going to get to know me. And it's probably the most informative about my journey because my approach to everything has been very scientific method. So I left Stockport to go to America in an attempt to play in the NBA, something that no other Brit had ever done at that point, and it was ridiculous. You will be kinder than to say, but in school I was not known for my athleticism, and I'm truly not interested in sport. I don't watch it now. I didn't watch it then. I did everything I could to avoid PE and rugby. Yeah. And so I made a plan to get to America that involved high school, because I was terrible at basketball back in that day, going to university, getting a scholarship. It was the only way I could afford to stay in America, and then getting drafted to the NBA. It didn't quite go that smoothly, but got there eventually. But all while I was doing that, I realized that playing sport, I mostly did basketball because the people I met early on in basketball made me feel very normal and were kind to me in a way that strangers were not often. But also, it felt like people said I couldn't do it. And so I had to prove to them that I could. Perhaps that's something in common with an entrepreneurial mindset. Some people said it was impossible. It's never been done. It'll never be done. And if it's going to be done, it won't be done by a fat kid from Stockport. And I wanted to prove them wrong. But I also realized that doing this job was not going to be the thing to really make my mind fizz. You know, it made my body fizz for sure, but it didn't make my mind fizz. And so what was I going to do there? And that was the plan from the age of 7 to be a psychologist. And so I transitioned very quickly out of basketball when I retired in, I don't know, I was 35, so a long time ago. And right into, after 6 months of drinking wine and eating cheesecake, I transitioned into very quickly into this job as a psychologist. That's what I do now.
What is it about psychology in particular that attracts you?
Imagine, I know lots of people have amazing jobs. I was a director of Britain's largest hospital trust up in Manchester for a long time through the pandemic. So I really recognize that lots of people have amazing jobs, and not just surgeons and nurses, but some of the auxiliary staff that you perhaps don't think of. They do amazing jobs with real life-saving consequences. But my job, I get to, when I do it well, potentially change people's minds just with words. Back in the day, they used to burn witches for that. Right? The idea that that's why we have this narrative around spells, right? The idea that simply the way that somebody talks to you can be so compelling because of the way the words are constructed, because of the thoughtfulness and intent behind them, that it can make you a different person. Imagine that's your job, right? What's not compelling about that? It can go to the dark side too. Don't get me wrong. There are people out there using these very same skills to sell people, I don't know, a new car for their midlife crisis. But there's also people out there who are using it to, help people through really difficult times, like the times we're living in now.
I do remember playing sport with you at school, and I remember you being the most reluctant rugby player I've ever come across, but equally the most sort of impressive and you could do whatever you wanted. You had everything, and I played with it and I enjoyed it, and I could see on your face you didn't in particular.
Yeah, I was always so worried. I remember we had one practice where we were practicing these dive tackles at people who are running by. And the thing I remember thinking, what if I break someone's neck? Because I was so disproportionately larger than anybody else. I was like, what if I almost said the name of somebody who I thought of who was a little skinny thing playing rugby. It's like, what if I damaged this person in some way by landing on top of them? And it was a thought in my mind every single time I stepped on a field. It wasn't what if I get hit? It's what happens when I land on somebody the wrong way, and am I willing to deal with the consequences of that? And the answer was always no.
It's just like I got into sports psychology, and from sports psychology, I got into marketing through just being fascinated by people and understanding why they do what they do.
I collect ridiculous things like pop figures, right? I never would have got into that if somebody hadn't connected my nerd love of comic books to this opportunity to have a real tangible item in my house. I know it's something that I should have left behind when I was 12, but I didn't do it when I was 12, and now I can afford to do it as a 50-odd-year-old. So there's no intrinsic problem with that. I think it's the idea that people like you and I understand the responsibility that comes with the power that we have to influence. And the difference between the light side and the dark side is how judicious we are.
So just thinking about your business today, APS, management consulting, professional services, world-class sort of thinking on kind of how organizations work and the people within them. What from the world of psychology, how did you get to a point where you thought, right, we're going to set up this company?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I had no idea what was available in psychology when I first started. And I think if I'm fair, when I first went to graduate school, even though I knew this really amazing occupational psychologist who was one of the professors at Penn State, I had no concept of how we could be used other than back in the day a bit of personality or cognitive testing. I had no idea there was this breadth of things that I'd end up being able to do. And so the company started off as, APS Intelligence started off as just a vehicle for me to do some stuff. Psychology-based stuff in organizations. And then I suddenly realized I was missing a trick here, because I can do an intervention, but then I go away and there's nothing scalable happening in the organization. So I kind of just say, here's a couple of days or a couple of weeks where I teach you some stuff and we work with you, and then you're on your own. It's like, but now I've got colleagues who can step in and who are increasingly making me redundant, which is brilliant, because they can do stuff that at a lighter touch, if you like, and some of it different things than I have skills in. And that's what I wanted. How can I build a group of people? And because I wasn't a proper entrepreneur, I didn't realize the back office that comes with that. Because our back office is bigger than our delivery team. Because the amount of work it takes to project manage, especially when really consequential things are being done in organizations about culture and about leadership, about organizational change, around governance, you can't afford to have that slip. And so it's not just about having brilliant people on site, it's about the machinery going on in the background. And it took me a lot of years to learn that. Yeah,
I mean, I've got to say, I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. And in fact, most entrepreneurs I speak to do not use that term. They do not even know that they are entrepreneurs or even being entrepreneurial. And a lot of it's kind of because they kind of just are who they are, and they're doing one little step at a time, and they're exploring aspects of their personalities, and then opportunities happen, and then they find themselves in a situation, and then they do this, and then suddenly they've got a company. And it's like, it's incredible really how it's just a little bit less ordered, that they appear to be more in tune with who they are and what they want from the world.
Yeah, I definitely resemble that remark, except with more mistakes probably. Lots of stumbling along, lots of doing things that were well out of my expertise area.
What I have found throughout the podcast series is actually entrepreneurialism is somewhat different. It's a different idea altogether, and it's much more about pursuit of passion or response to a situation or something quite social in that, it's trying to fix a problem either socially or in business. And then the money thing kind of seems to come later. It actually once people have got momentum and confidence and started to build a team, that's when people start to be aware of value and exit events and things like that.
Yep.
So it'd be interesting just to sort of get your sort of take up on that, really, in terms of both your business and also, how you see psychology in the setting of a workplace.
Yeah, I think most labels of consequence in the workplace, they come with an archetype. You say the word and a certain type of person with a certain type of background will appear, right? So if you say marketing director, certain images will appear in your head, especially if you're within, those circles. You'll know you'll even be able to tell when they say what school they went to or what training they had. You'll know if it's good training or bad training, right? CFOs. You'll have a sense of who that is, what gender they are, what background they came from, what school they went to, especially if you're talking about FTSE or the American equivalent companies. HR director, interesting, right? Because all of a sudden the picture you have is probably not the same gender as the first ones we were talking about,
very good.
For starters. But then there's even interesting things. You go to America, if you look at IT directors in America, disproportionately African-American. Really interesting, right? Because not disproportionately anywhere else, but disproportionately. And then chief diversity officer, what does that person look like? You can see this picture. Entrepreneur has the same problem. It has this esoteric, hard to pin down and understand, often excusable rudeness and unnecessarily controversial. All of these are, because even as I'm saying this, people are probably thinking, okay, Jeff Bezos, I'm in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I'm going to buy my third yacht. Even from a PR point of view, just unnecessary, right? You could wait. You've got Elon Musk, purposefully provocative to the detriment of his share price. That's the kind of stuff that comes across in your mind. And instead, it should be more nuanced. The idea that perhaps entrepreneur would be better served as somebody who's actually looking to solve intractable problems, problems that other people have failed at, and perhaps society or organizations have broadly stopped trying to solve. But I'm going to do this. I know a woman who's just doing amazing work, and her biotech firm that she's founded, she found it incredibly difficult to get funding, and she's out there trying to solve some of the really intractable cancer challenges that we face. Such an important problem. Many people aren't bothering. And there she is in this space. And that, to me, a woman who is an introvert, who is a brown woman, an Asian woman, in this space doing that work, you have to, she's not defined by those other characters, but her willingness to drag herself through this, to face people who dismiss her because of how she looks and how she talks. And she didn't go to the right school, apparently, even though she's a PhD. That's the kind of thing that I think should define entrepreneurialism, that should be recognized by people and rewarded by people and invested in by people. Not the charisma nonsense.
I quite agree. And charisma is one of the things that, immediately you start to think about. And I love the idea of entrepreneurs or founders being sort of somewhat rude and direct. And a lot of that is that they're getting away with it, and nobody's stopping them. No one's like pulling them up on it and correcting them.
It's not limited to entrepreneurs, right? There's lots of senior people who believe that because I am talented, my rudeness is related to my talent, right? So if you make me be nice, I'll be less good is the implicit threat of hundreds of senior leaders. It's a nonsense. The same thing with charisma. I did a post on LinkedIn, social media the other day that garnered some attention from people because it's like charisma's bollocks, right? We never call women charismatic broadly. It's not that we may not think it, but rarely is that term used. But also it's often the term we use when we look at a person, a man, and say, you're really successful and you're kind of strange and odd and I don't understand how you're doing it, so I'm going to call you charismatic. You're also kind
Mercurial.
of rude. And exactly, that same thing where I'm really just excusing a combination of stuff that I don't understand.
Well, another one of those phrases is gravitas.
Yeah. It's an absurd idea. In this world we're in, a sophisticated, practical nuance is more important than certainty. A presence that is vulnerable and open to input from others is more important than a staunch, utterly bold, indestructible kind of assertiveness. That it's unequivocally true. Yeah. Anytime you look at people who are that rigid and always certain, they just attract the wrong kind of followers. It's a lesson for entrepreneurs I talk about all the time. If you are bold, certain, like omniscient, you know everything, and you're invulnerable, it appears you can never be harmed, you attract the wrong kind of followers. You attract people who are never going to have to support you or never imagine they would. They just can run along in your wake. You attract people, if you're omniscient, if you know everything, why would I ever tell you when I know something? Why would I ever tell you when I've got a bit of insight that perhaps you don't? Why would I bother? You know everything, go ahead. I will just run along with you until the funding runs out. And then I'll run and stick myself like a remora onto the next big shark that comes along.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. And what I have learned about entrepreneurs is mostly they've got just high levels of understanding of themselves, high levels of just resilience. They're just able to just keep going. So it's interesting you talk about, well, most entrepreneurs we will find are struggling. They are trying to get funding. It's trying to make ends meet. They're quite often living a life where they're not even paying themselves. You know what I mean? There's the tension, anxiety, stress is beyond what others would tolerate.
Yeah. I mean, anytime we look at the very best of people, the people who've made it through, it's like looking at Broadway actors or West End actors and saying, well, look at that person. There's Benedict Cumberbatch on, I don't know, I can never pronounce his name, on the West End, and look how well he's doing. Yes. It's like, well, but if you look at the people who are swings in the West, they learn every single part and they get paid pittance for it. It's like, that's a more realistic. And I think your description of most entrepreneurs is more realistic. Constantly worried where the next check's going to come from, constantly worried about building up this team of people who need to be extraordinary. But there's always this perilous worry about, can I afford this team of people who are extraordinary to do this thing? Are they passionate enough? Do they love what we're doing? Do they understand our purpose? And then the relinquishing part of being an entrepreneur, like to be successful, I think you have to relinquish. You have to say, I've been doing a lot of stuff that I'm not great at, and I need to relinquish some of that.
So that has cropped up. There seem to be two sides of the same coin going on here. There's a bit about understanding yourself, and then there's a bit about understanding what you're not, and being able to build a team around that.
Yeah.
And again, this is why I think you are absolutely an entrepreneur, and you have entrepreneurial spirit as well. It's because of that ability to kind of know who you are, know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, build a team, build trust, make things happen.
Yeah, I mean, if what you want to achieve is powerful enough, then your need to have a specific role within it becomes less important. So I think that work shouldn't wound.
Yeah.
I think that sustainable success doesn't have a body count. I think that we can have a challenging world of work where people in your presence, and anybody who works with me, this is absolutely true. I am not a warm and fuzzy guy. I am robust, I think is the word that is used. I am robust. My expectations for people are unbelievably high. I promise to stretch people and never break them. I think there's an easy sign here where you can say, no, you can do more, and this is what I want you to do. But then there's a point where you see that wavering of the muscles, and it's like, this is too much. Well, let's ease back a bit here.
Yes.
So that's what I want. And I can't make a world of work where less people are wounded by something that should be not as consequential as your family and not as consequential as your health. And I don't think that's controversial. But do an excellent job at the highest quality and then be able to go home and still have enough capacity to have a life around that.
Yeah.
I can't do that if I'm doing every part of it, especially the bits that I do poorly.
Yeah.
So the self-knowledge, the introspection, the last book I wrote, I'm supposed to be writing another one, it's not going well. The last book I wrote, it was in 3 sections, and the first section was introspection for exactly that reason. Because introspection is where it starts. If you don't know yourself, you will always do great harm. You won't mean to. The example I use all the time, I just love this because so many people have had this experience with people. When you meet someone for the first time, invariably this will be with a man, but you meet a man for the first time and they'll say to you something like, the thing you need to know about me is, and you know that this is going to be a doozy, right? Broadly, I think it's a bad way for people to start a conversation with somebody new. But anyway, the thing you need to know about me is I'm direct and honest. Everybody listening or watching this knows that that man is an asshole. Everybody knows. It's really sad in a way because that man may not mean to be an asshole, but they are most certainly one. They don't know because their idea, this inner principle they've got of themselves that they are direct and honest, because these are good things, right? They're related to transparency. They're related to clarity. They should be good, but they don't realize that those principles they have, they come across to other people as thoughtless and careless and cruel and even malicious. And that's why that introspection is so important. If you don't, it's not just enough to say, I know who I am. You've got to know is that met by the world outside? I know I'm a psychologist and a nerd, and that stopping me on the street and talking to me about lightsabers, I just bought a new one, is probably the way to get a relationship with me, right? But when people see me, they don't see that. I know I'm not stupid enough to think that when a 6'9" black man walks down the street, that what people see is a nerd who loves Star Wars. So I'm aware of how the world sees me. And if I wasn't, not only might I do harm, but harm might be done to me.
I love it when people accidentally say, I'm going to be really honest with you now.
Oh,
and
boy.
I'm thinking, what happened to the last bit of the conversation?
Right.
What
this is the point where honesty starts.
How much honesty were we getting? So I love it and they do it accidentally. Just thinking about the work you're doing today. And I know that you're spending a lot of time out in the US, and obviously you had a fantastic sporting career in the US. Is there something different about kind of management culture, the psychology of people within companies in the US when compared to Europe? Have you noticed any changes?
I think there are some differences between the UK and the States. Certainly, the UK and broadly the EU, mainland, Western Europe as well. There are some differences there, but America has an American dream paradox, right? So the idea that you come here, you can be anything, notwithstanding the fact that coming there is not something they welcome pretty much from a political point of view. But that narrative exists strongly for people. And so the idea for entrepreneurs is that, what's wrong with you? So it's almost like it doesn't matter that you set out to solve this really difficult problem. What's wrong with you? You haven't done it yet. So there's almost a kind of like weirdo. Something wrong with you as an individual, because America is also a very ego, and I don't mean that in a kind of negative way, just simply a self-driven thing. And that can be a real challenge for entrepreneurs, because it's like, it's not that you didn't assemble the right team. It's not that your problem is too hard. It's like, there's something wrong with you. Are you not working hard enough? Is that what it is? Whereas I think there's something, funders not interested necessarily in pragmatism, but I think there's broadly a pragmatism of an assessment of, is this problem too difficult? There is an assessment of you as an individual, but there's less of this idea that when you fail there, it is the idea that you are deficient in some significant way. Yeah. Other factors get to be taken into account here, I think, which is one thing. Other things that are different, the expectation of work is different, the priority of work is different. It blows people's minds that when I travel, and it's just not my doing. We've got a head of people, but when one of our team is in Singapore right now, and she'll come back, and that day of work, that her travel day is a day of work, and so she'll get that day back. And that to a British person shouldn't be shocking. I hope for most people's companies that's not shocking. She's not expected into work that day, even if she arrives at 3. Yeah. She's not expected to do anything but just rest. Right, and the day that she traveled is a day back onto your allowance, because you've now spent that day working. It's if you flew on a Saturday or a Sunday, same thing. And in America, there's the idea of my nephew who works for Tesla, there are some entrepreneurs who should have limits put on them. Who works for Tesla gets 2 days of holiday a year.
Right.
We're planning a family reunion this year that I'd love him to attend. And we don't know at this moment if he can come in October, because he can put in an unpaid leave request, but there's no guarantee that he'll get it. And if he doesn't get it and leaves, he'll lose his job. It's like, so there's unrealistic expectations, I think, of the priority of work, even whether you're an entrepreneur or a worker. And I think that's damaging for entrepreneurs, because you'll have seen, I'm sure, with some of them, many of them will talk about how close to the bone they got to just burning out and doing self-harming behaviors because of it, or losing families because of it. It's so harsh.
I see massive differences, and the differences appear to be getting more pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
My US colleagues, they are more motivated, they're clearer, they back themselves better. They're much better at asking for raises, asking for things, in general, more demanding of themselves and the setting that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I have over the years seen more and more differences of a sort of can do, can't do sort of thing going on, and all businesses that I come into contact with, I'm always advising them about, right, US strategy, what's your plan for America? Because it massive market, no shit Sherlock, but
requires adjustments, right?
It totally does, but the opportunity is incredible.
Yeah.
But I have noticed the difference. But I suppose also in America, the differences inside America are also becoming more and more apparent.
Yeah, people don't realize it. The United States of America is a relevant part of the kind of America narrative. When one of the clients I was talking to last night is in kind of Boston and New England area, and their personal narratives for individuals, their ways of operating within their workplace are radically different than some of the clients we have in Chicago. Radically different again than when you go to Silicon Valley, to some of the, especially the smaller tech firms there. And there's this difference, which is East and West, and then there's a difference North and South as well.
I started this thinking that there was a bit of entrepreneurial spirit in everyone, and anybody could be an entrepreneur if they wanted to be, sort of thing. I found that's not really true, and also quite a lot of organisations actually don't want entrepreneurs. They don't want that much entrepreneurial spirit either. And going back to your Tesla example, they actually just want you to just stick to the rules, stick to the guidelines.
Be a drone.
Exactly. And I've asked this question. We've spoken to people in private equity and also other academics.
Mm-hmm.
They're all saying the same thing, really, which is most people in working environments a long way from being an entrepreneur, and actually the environments that they're in discourage it, and I just wonder. I just wonder about that, because I can sort of see how, if you're working at a bank or something, you don't want risk takers or people that are sort of making it all up for themselves. But also there is still a lot of opportunity there in a world that is getting corralled into sort of tech and AI and things like that. It's like surely there is something around the human spirit and, looking for, new ideas and originality that, is valuable.
So this is what I'd say to that. Everybody loves a binary, right? People love binaries, and most of the world is not binary. Sometimes that appears controversial for people, but it's not. Most things are not as binary as we imagine they are.
Yeah.
And so if we put non-entrepreneurial over here on one end of the axis, and we put entrepreneurial to the most extreme limit here, what we find is, and don't immediately go to a normal curve, because it's not often the way that it works, right? But what you find here is that some of the various qualities in various different combinations will exist along this plane.
Yeah.
It's just that two of those qualities that, when they exist with a third, appear to be really highly entrepreneurial. If they just on their own, without that third, or with a different third, they don't appear entrepreneurial at all. But they're still those qualities. And what I think is important for us in workplaces is how can we, it's one of the things we do a lot, how can we help people identify what talent is? And talent in a contemporary sense, a world where everything is changing. There was a study by Deloitte that was done in 2016 that said between 2016 and 2030, between 75 and 375 million job roles globally will shift. between 75 and 375 million job roles globally will shift. In that environment, saying you need this degree from this university is not a good criteria for a worker for the future.
Yeah.
So understanding some of these entrepreneurial criteria, some of the elements that make them up in a more granular way, and understanding, some of the qualities that we know are important, agility of thought and an understanding and embracing of change and difference. These things we know are also going to be important in a world that's more global despite politics. Understanding how those are distributed in your workplace is really important, and then allowing opportunities for their expression.
Yeah.
Because nobody who's got a skill is going to really find purpose in a place where that skill is never allowed to be expressed, where you're always a pawn. It's as if you're being turned into, it's a really interesting thing about the AI thing. We're trying to make AI more human at the same time that we want humans to be more robotic. It's such an interesting thing. And so if you can find out and identify, we do that with clients. How do you identify these skills and qualities that are going to be in combination useful in a changing dynamic world? Then not everybody has to manifest the exact cluster that will be recognized today as entrepreneurial. Because what will be recognized as entrepreneurial in a world that's going to be quite different when it's augmented by technology in a different way, or when regulation is shifted, or when something else happens.
If you think about the choices that you make as you're coming through school, university and the like, and you have to make very early calls on what you do, and then that can obviously limit you, and also create a kind of linearity in terms of how your life then rolls. And it's very interesting to sort of your life is sort of
lumpy.
You've had multiple careers, and that's becoming more and more the norm.
You're absolutely right. It is categorically more the norm now, and to point out, we have an education system that does that. But some countries that are much higher on the happiness index and much higher on the productivity index, and not just Scandinavian countries, have a very different approach to learning. It is absurd to say in 2024 to a child who's 15, pick the 6 subjects that are going to propel you to a career that you won't have for another decade. It's absurd. It's absurd that we decide that some subjects are important, maths and English. And I'm not saying they're unimportant, but then other subjects like music and art are unimportant when what is your world, although of course it's deeply technical in a way that I think many people wouldn't understand, really relies on a good knowledge and bits of science and psychology. But what is that world without an ability to inherently understand the kind of mystery of a bit of music and the importance of art? It's like these things in combination and in really odd ways are going to be so important moving forward. We do need to change our education system, but teachers have been telling us that for the last 2 decades.
It's like a means to an end, and it fails to appreciate inspiration and individuality. The whole system is all geared towards metrics that aren't particularly, I mean, they're relevant, in some way, but they're not relevant in terms of what it will actually mean to people and where it takes them longer term.
It's that amazing thing about measurement, right? What you measure can actually be determinant of what the point of the intervention is, right? So if you're measuring how many kids get A's or A stars, then you're not actually measuring learning. You're measuring exam-taking proficiency. And that is in a world where exam-taking proficiency is not a good indicator of future performance. It's a good indicator of what clubs you can get into, and whether those clubs be private schools or whether those clubs be grammar schools like ours, or whether those clubs be certain universities or certain colleges or certain universities. But judging by the outputs of those certain colleges or certain universities, there's certainly no indicator of definite success either. And certainly not of huge damage to entire society, depending on your political perspective. So we're measuring the wrong thing, and because we're measuring the wrong thing, we're delivering the wrong outcome. I'm on lots of social media platforms, and I know I'm too old for TikTok before anybody says it, but I'm on TikTok, and I have loved what I've learned off TikTok. It does 2 things for me. I mean, this is notwithstanding the debates about data sharing in China and other things, right? But I'm on there, and on days when it's really tough, at night, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, when I finally get out of the office, it's showing me cats and dogs enjoying each other's company. I'm like, oh, that's cute. And it gives me a little kind of, and at other times I'm following these linguists who are teaching me about why certain types of language come about. I'm following this Native American community thing that I suddenly got involved in. There's a real richness to my learning that gives me another opportunity outside of my work, but augments my work on a daily basis. There isn't a day goes by where some piece of something I've pulled from a non-traditional source, as well as all the regular learning and teaching that I do.
Just now thinking about companies today and what you're seeing in sort of corporate life. Obviously, in our space, client tenure getting shorter, more anxious, more interest in ROI.
Yep.
So you see much more dynamism, clients sort of scaling up, scaling down, looking for outsourcing, looking for offshoring. I'm just wondering how any of those trends are sort of connecting into the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly client tenure and the amount of energy it takes to maintain a client, the cost of that sale in a brutal sense is far larger. The monitoring and evaluation and the sense checking, the sensitivity to reputation, as in the mood and move of the outside world as it observes an organization can change what they then decide to do internally. The fear that exists in organization and the anxiety about what if the world knew we were doing leadership training with our junior leaders. Even though that doesn't seem controversial, they're worried about it. There's lots of things shifting and changing. There is, and it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me, but I really have noticed this idea that there's lots of organizations that are very quick to follow a trend and then go through a deep regret cycle after that. So they see something, even when it's a profound and important trend, whether it's the Me Too movement, right? So they see this and they all go, this is terrible. Gender equity is important. No women will be abused in our organization. And what they don't do is recognize the regret cycle that they're going to go through by making promises that they have not built up the capacity to meet. They haven't realized we call it the cascade of consequences that come from this promise. Even simple promises, we do this exercise with clients all the time. We audit their website and say, this is what you promise. So take one sentence from your website. A common sentence on about 60% of FTSE or their American equivalent websites is in the careers page is something along the lines of, your manager will take an interest in your career. You make that promise. You can look back. We use the Wayback Machine. It's a tool on the internet where you can look back and see what a website said 10 years ago. Right? So these are new promises that we know are being made, new values and new promises. Your manager will take an interest in your career. And what we talk to them about is make that promise and immediately build capacity, or make that promise after you build capacity. Because think about what needs to be true for that. You're a utilization culture. You demand that all of your people have an 83 or 86% utilization. How does a manager with 17 direct reports spend any time with his people and meet that target? So there's an instant policy, logistical change you've got to make. How does a manager who doesn't have the skills, the coaching and facilitation skills to have an engaged conversation with somebody else do that? How does a manager who doesn't know how to talk to women as a man, or doesn't know how to talk to black people as a white person, or doesn't know how to talk to queer people as a straight person, how do they engage and fulfill that promise? You suddenly realize there's this cascade of consequences that come from that one promise. And then you realize, when we give them a list of what's the highest number I've done? Probably 310 or something promises just from the careers page. You realize if you lay each one of those out, holy smokes, it's your entire infrastructure has to change. Your learning and development, your recruitment process, everything has to shift. So that's what I'm noticing. People jumping on a trend, huge regret, and then working on a timescale that's in decades instead of years to build that capacity to fulfill the promise.
I really love that idea of cascade of consequences. That's such a brilliant perspective, and you can't argue with it. And and obviously, what it does do is it sort of can create an overwhelming list of work to be done. But also, I think, and I've experienced this like so many times now. It's like when you look at your normal leadership group, and you're thinking about leadership behaviors, leadership culture, they generally will tend to gravitate towards output, the work, the clients, project management, billable hours, those sorts of things. People development, attraction, support, stretching, nearly nothing. And a lot of that is a consequential thing linked to where a company is going and the life stage of a company and where they're at in that journey. But people in general in leadership generally are not investing enough in the talent that is.
It's an afterthought.
It totally is.
It's an afterthought, and then it's a regret, right? So when something isn't working, like, oh, we didn't get the right people, or why we got such high attrition, and it's because of we didn't get the right people, we don't have the right processes. Yeah. I think it's such a shame because I say this all, I'm not a warm and fuzzy psychologist. I'm not in this to try and tell commercial organizations, hey, profit doesn't matter, your stakeholders don't matter. I want to kick ass. I used to play sport at a decent level, right? I always knew that when you played somebody, you didn't want to beat them by 1 point. So I don't want to win in the same way that many corporates do, just be a percentage above their competitor. Yeah. I want to kick their ass. I want to win by 30 so that next time we play, they've already lost, right? But that comes with an integration of understanding how policy, logistics, people, culture, leadership, and then the technical and strategic elements of your work all work together. And your strategy is not going to be met on time or as effectively if you've got a breakdown in any one of those areas.
Yeah. Again, one of the things I've picked out from this series so far has been the really good standout entrepreneurs are amazing collaborators. They're brilliant about team and they know how it all works together and how to bring out the best of one another, whilst being intensely competitive.
Yeah.
Like weirdly competitive. Like I want to crush the opposition level.
Yes.
And that's about drive. That's about being unreasonable. That's passion. It's deep. But it's that strange kind of chemistry and strange duality that I have seen in the ones that are really doing something amazing in their space.
It does feel strange if you've never been on a team.
Yeah.
I think I tell people all the time, and this is true, though it will be unwelcome for many people listening and watching. Most people have never been on a team. Most people have never been on a team. Our narrative about teaming is the idea that teaming is a perpetual state of calculated selflessness. It is the idea that you have a job to do that you will be held accountable to.
Yes.
But it's also your job to inconvenience yourself to allow somebody else to achieve so that the whole achieves. That is the narrative. That's why most people have never been on a team, because most people have been on high-functioning groups with excellent people who can always deliver their outcome. But then when things change, when the environment becomes uncertain, when there's a new disruptor in there, all of a sudden, that's not enough. And people start finding that they almost meet their target, but then the collective doesn't somehow. And that's why this idea that I'm going to sacrifice my performance today to support you. You need 10 minutes of my time, even though I need 10 minutes to finish this thing and it'll mean I have to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
You're going to get my 10 minutes because what we're doing is more important than what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's what I love that about teaming. The idea that contributions from other people, statistical analysis is just not my sweet spot.
Yeah.
Interpretation, sweet spot. So when people, my organization can do that statistical analysis, there's a conversion of leadership. There's it's not really distributed, there's a contextual leadership. All of a sudden, I'm going to say, in this context, you're the leader of this, because you're the one who knows how to do this statistical and use that program, because I did statistical analysis with a pencil and paper in university, not with the programs that they use nowadays. So that's what makes a team work. This idea that you celebrate the success of other people. My best year was in Orlando, thankfully Orlando Magic. I remember having a great game. We'd won on the road in Houston, Keem Olajuwon, brilliant bloke, by the way. And I got lucky. And I remember afterwards, I walked past one of my point guard, my leader of the team, the captain of the team, being interviewed. And the interviewer said, so how's it going to affect team chemistry? You've got you're scoring less points and this other guy's scoring less points and John's really coming on well. And I looked at him, and I'll never forget the look on his face. And it's just like, what are you talking about? John's playing great basketball. We're going to ride John until he's not playing great basketball. And then we're going to ride the next person who's playing well. I was like, I walked off and I felt this feeling like, wow.
Yeah.
Because he could have easily said in a sport where how many points you score a game determines your next contract, could have easily have said something different. But he's like, no, this is how we win. The hot hand, we ride them. The person with the expertise, we go with them. Yeah. And that's what teams do. But when you look around in entrepreneurial circles, oftentimes that's where it breaks down because everybody wants to be the one who's the genius, or everybody wants to be the one who's seen as the magnetic character or the pivotal key person, instead of just like, who's hot today? Who's got the right ideas today? Who's got the mojo today?
Well, I'm making conscious, deliberate decisions about how to sort of leverage those skills.
Yeah.
Recognizing that people need rest, people get injured, people are in,
exactly
different teams, different attributes.
Yeah.
But having the win as the sort of North Star for how you deploy your assets, that's pretty cool.
And everybody knowing what a win looks like, right? So it's not just a win is not just it's got to be more compelling. It can include kind of a revenue target. It can include a profit margin. Win has got to be more compelling than that.
But I think in companies, though, they tend to make less conscious decisions, though, about leveraging talent, because they tend to sort of see everything as the same, because they want things to be a bit more uniform and a bit more manageable.
Yeah. But also I'd say it's because we don't, in some companies at least, we see that people don't see people, they see job descriptions.
Yes.
It's a Gantt chart.
Yes.
I'm going to hand this to you and you're going to do that thing, which may be quite mysterious to me because I don't really care what you do. But I just know at the end of it produces something that I then pass on to somebody else. And that's how we manage, rather than saying, I mean, there's this ridiculous narrative of a war for talent. It's been out there for like 30 years. And every year we talk about it like it's just now because of the pandemic, because of the something else. We've been saying this for 30 odd years, the war for talent. And then you look around workplaces, and some of the work that we do, we've got this inventory, the STARS inventory, where you suddenly realize you've got a ton of people with amazing talent. Yeah. You just didn't recognize it, because talent nowadays comes in unusual packages.
Yeah.
True brilliance comes in an introvert who you've rarely heard a whisper from. Wonderful technical skill comes from somebody who sounds like they're an East London wide boy. Sometimes, some of the things that we imagine, that archetype that we started with, is in the way of you seeing the talent that's right in front of you.
But it goes back to this thing around polymath, being a polymath, and I buy the principle of it, even though I accept it looks really unconventional and can be a bit chaotic. Mm-hmm. And often, we talk about making judgment calls around certain careers, and immediately it conjures up imagery of where you came from and your pedigree and your sort of your upbringing and the type of school you went to and all the rest of it. But if you look back on your amazing journey so far, are there any kind of words of advice you'd give to yourself as a sort of young John Amaechi?
I do get asked this on occasion, so an answer floods to my head immediately because I've had time to think about it. I probably wouldn't have played sport. I would be an utterly invisible psychologist, slightly fatter, possibly married or partnered up in Manchester. There's something about that appeals to me. There's an accountability, but a less responsibility, I think. I feel for that. But broadly, if that's too dour, my advice that's more applicable to lots of people would be the idea of just remember that success and successful people, a big component of that, of the success of successful people, no matter whether it's the high-end people we see on TV or just the people in your community who've done well for themselves, is their ability to tolerate mundanity. My ability to do boring stuff consistently and well has been the route, whether it's been in sport. I remember going into the gym and only practicing pivots. And nobody will know what that means, but jump and turn back, and jump and turn back, and jump and turn back, only practicing layups.
Yeah.
again and again and again, only practicing free throws, only practicing a right-handed dribble of a certain kind. It was tortuously dull.
Yeah.
My ability to tolerate that meant that a 17-year-old kid who liked Greg's steak slices and science fiction, right? Who liked that at the age of 17 was starting in the NBA 6 years later.
Yeah.
Now, if a fat kid from Stockport can do that, any entrepreneur you want who's listening to this, potential entrepreneur, you know, there's little you can't do if you can tolerate that mundanity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It's been
Thank you.
a brilliant time talking to you. And many, many congratulations.
Thank you.
Are an outstanding person.
Not there yet, but I will be.
Work in progress.
Yes.
And best of luck with APS. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Entrepreneurs in the Wild. Look out for it. It's available wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you.